The older you get, the more dangerous your honesty becomes, not because the truth itself changes, but because the world no longer receives your words as innocent. As you age, your insights become sharper, your voice gains authority, and people become threatened by the weight of what you say. The truth that once sparked conversations now causes discomfort, silence, or even resentment. It becomes less about sharing to be understood and more about protecting your inner world from misinterpretation and misuse. Honesty at this stage is not about openness, it's about discernment. What you say can echo longer than you live, and in that echo, the world might twist your wisdom into a weapon or a warning. Choose silence not as retreat, but as mastery. When we are young, we seek validation through openness. We want to be seen. We want to be understood. We believe the world rewards authenticity. We tell our stories, share our mistakes, and open our hearts in the hope that someone, somewhere, will finally understand us and offer the unconditional acceptance we so desperately crave. But as time goes on, and the years harden us like the bark of an old tree, we learn that this world does not cherish your truths. It collects them, stores them, and eventually turns them into instruments of control or sources of gossip. You learn that truth has timing, and sometimes the right time is never. Not everyone deserves to hear your heart laid bare. There comes a time in life, usually late after many betrayals, broken friendships, and silent disappointments, when you learn that silence is not cowardice. It is protection. It is wisdom earned in blood, in sleepless nights, and in long hours of introspection. You become aware that most people don't want your real thoughts. They want comfort. They don't seek your truth. They want affirmation of their own. And when you refuse to give them what they expect, they label you bitter, strange, or senile. But you are none of these. You are awake, and your silence is your final form of strength. It is not emptiness. It is sacred space. I have seen this in the patients I treated, in the elders who came to me, not for healing, but for understanding. And more painfully, I saw it in myself, in the eyes of those who sat across from me with trembling hands and stories too heavy to speak. I saw the reflection of my own fears and realizations. Their words often stopped short, not because they forgot, but because they remembered too much. They had learned the cost of transparency. They had learned that even those closest to them could not carry their truths without dropping them, breaking them, or using them against them. They understood that truth, unguarded, is vulnerability, and in this world, vulnerability without trust is dangerous. Let me tell you now, with the urgency of a man who has lived long and seen deeper than most, there are things you must carry to your grave. Not out of shame, but out of necessity. These are not secrets. They are sacred burdens. They are truths forged in solitude, held in the heart not because you fear judgment, but because the world does not have the language to receive them properly. To share them would be to expose your soul to misunderstanding, misinterpretation, and misuse. And when you are old, peace becomes more precious than even connection. Preserve your peace. We often imagine old age as a time of rest, reflection, and gratitude. But let me speak honestly, old age, for many, is a reckoning. It is when all the unhealed parts of yourself come to visit, one by one, like old friends you avoided for decades. The face you wear in public becomes a mask to hide the quiet earthquakes inside. You sit in a room full of memories, some joyful, some unbearable, and you realize that memory is not passive. It is an active force. It shapes your present. It shouts at you in the silence. It shows you versions of yourself you tried to forget. Old age is not just the summation of years. It is the unveiling of everything you never dealt with. The world may stop demanding your energy, but your soul begins to make its own demands, and those demands are louder, harder, and more urgent than anything youth ever faced. This is not a burden. It is the final invitation to reconcile with yourself. There is a loneliness in old age that no one warns you about. Not the loneliness of physical absence or empty rooms, but the loneliness of being untranslatable. You become a library of ancient knowledge in a world that no longer reads your language. The things that shaped you, war, loss, hunger, miracles, heartbreak, are invisible to younger eyes. They see your body, but not your journey, and you cannot fault them. They have not lived long enough to recognize the weight behind your silence. So you stop explaining, you stop correcting, you nod, you smile, you let them think what they want, and inside you retreat to a quiet place. That place is not bitter. It is sacred. It is where your real life lives, untouched by misunderstanding. And maybe that is the final freedom, not to be seen, not to be heard, but to simply be. Fully, without the need to justify your existence to anyone. And then there is death, not as an event, but as a presence. When you are young, death is a distant threat. When you are old, it becomes a companion. It walks beside you. It whispers at night. It is no longer something to fear, but something to understand. The world around you keeps pretending that death is the enemy, that life must always be prolonged, fought for, extended. But you begin to realize that life is not measured by its length, but by its depth. And sometimes the deepest moments come at the very end, when you no longer chase, no longer prove, no longer need to be anything other than what you are. The readiness for death is not despair, it is peace. It is not an end, it is a homecoming. But speak this aloud, and the world will panic. They will think you are giving up, but you are not. You are embracing the silence as your final, most beautiful form of truth. And in that silence, you are more alive than you have ever been. There is a strange paradox that emerges when one has walked a long, jagged road of life and finds themselves in the final chapters. You become both infinitely wise and profoundly misunderstood. You carry a mind sharpened by a lifetime of suffering, transformation, and observation. But the world no longer looks to you for insight. Instead, it sees your slowness, your wrinkles, your silence, and assumes decay where there is refinement. This disconnect is painful, not because of pride, but because of love. You have seen generations make the same mistakes, fall into the same illusions, worship the same empty idols. You have learned that the most dangerous thing a person can hold is certainty without depth. But try and offer this wisdom, and you are often met with dismissive smiles, polite nods, or outright ignorance. So you retreat, not because you have nothing to say, but because the cost of saying it has grown too great. You become a silent prophet in your own home. Your solitude becomes your scripture, and while the world rushes forward, you begin to understand that your presence itself, your mere being, is your final gift. A walking storybook they may never read, but one that holds truths they will someday live. And yet, there is a deeper irony to all of this. The older you become, the more you realize that truth was never meant to be spoken fully in the first place. Not because it lacks value, but because it was always meant to be lived, quietly, deeply, sincerely. In youth we believed that if we could just say the right thing, everything would make sense. That articulation would bring clarity, connection, even healing. But life teaches otherwise. There are truths that language cannot hold. Words, no matter how carefully chosen, often collapse under the weight of what we carry. And so, in your later years, you learn to express truth not through explanation, but through presence, a look, a gesture, a stillness. You become an embodiment of what cannot be said, and those who are wise will recognize it, not in your voice, but in your silence. There is also a spiritual maturation that quietly unfolds in these final chapters. The ego, once so loud and insistent, becomes like an old engine winding down. You no longer need to be right. You no longer argue to win. You no longer feel the need to impress or to correct or to prove anything to anyone. This is not indifference. It is transcendence. The soul, finally free from the posturing of the world, begins to long for what is eternal. You find yourself pulled toward the simple and the sacred, the sound of birds in the morning, the way light dances across a wall, the feel of a loved one's hand resting quietly in yours. These moments become your sermons. They speak louder than any philosophy ever could, and you realize that enlightenment was never a mountaintop. It was the quiet dignity with which you choose to carry your final days. And if you are lucky, truly lucky, you will meet another soul in your twilight years who also understands this language of silence. Someone who sees the battles you fought in your eyes without needing to ask. In their presence, you do not need to explain, impress, or entertain. You simply sit together, two old souls who have made peace with the mess of living. You speak in fragments, in memories, in long pauses that say more than stories ever could. These moments are rare, but they are holy. They remind you that even as the world forgets how to listen, even as your voice fades and your body slows, connection is still possible. Not through the sharing of facts, but through the quiet recognition of another who has also walked the long road home.